Story 1. My husband passed away 2 years ago. He was a remodeler who had a broad list of clients. For a time, to help out the adult daughter, let's call her Kiki, of my good friend of 42 years, Ami, he would hire her as a helper on some of his larger remodeling projects. During that time, Kiki would occasionally borrow things for her own projects: a portable compact disc player, a pair of channel locks, a winch and come along, a table saw, chainsaw, a Graco cart paint sprayer, and an air compressor and nail gun. They were all borrowed clean, in working order, in good condition with all relevant parts included. Every single one of them was returned with great delays, all broken and missing significant parts, and a multitude of excuses. Over 2 years, Kiki managed to cost him nearly $5,000 in losses. Finally, he also quit hiring her as a helper because he caught her stealing from one of his clients and forced her to put the item she took right back, and then kicked her off the job immediately. Last September, I was visiting Ami, and Kiki was there. Then Kiki hit me up for what she called her promised inheritance, which was the first I ever heard about it. Given that my husband and I spent the 8 years of his terminal illness talking about what he wanted after his death, given that he gifted things of his that he wanted friends to have before he died, I knew very well he didn't intend for Kiki to have anything. My husband left no will. Ami knew that my husband had quit lending her tools after getting the cart paint sprayer back. It was a $1,200 purchase and was less than 4 months old when it was borrowed and returned broken in ways the warranty would not cover. Ami also knew Kiki's attempted theft had caused him to refuse to have her work on anything with him for any reason. Ami was also a victim of her daughter stealing from her as well. Now, our state is a community property state. When a spouse dies without a will, only the surviving spouse inherits, so Ami told her daughter to back off. I got the bright idea of how I was going to handle getting rid of all that broken stuff which was still taking up room in the tool shed. So I told her I'd be sure to pick something out for her, even though her own behavior was the root cause of the bad blood between herself and my husband. So, the next day, with Ami's help, I dropped off all the broken tools and the busted-up compact disc player Kiki borrowed from my husband at her apartment. Kiki wanted to know what I expected her to do with all of it. I told her that I expected her to do with them whatever it was she had expected my husband to do with them after she returned them in the condition they were in. Now, she is the proud owner of a bunch of useless tools, and I got to reclaim nearly 35 square feet of space in what is now my tool shed. Story 2. Now to the story. I work as an armed guard for an armored truck service. For those who don't know, we are responsible for picking up money and checks from other businesses, that is, banks, stores, restaurants, etc. As part of my job handling large amounts of cash, I carry a sidearm or handgun for those not familiar with firearms to protect myself and the money. Where I live, you have to have what's called a concealed carry permit to have such a firearm outside of work hours, which I have. I am on my way home and have to stop at the store to pick up dinner for myself. The store I go to has employees that wear a blue polo and tan pants. My uniform is black pants and a red polo with the company name on it. As I had just gotten off work, I still have my name badge on and sidearm in its holster on my hip. Enter the agitated lady. I'm browsing the freezer aisle when she stops me and starts to ask where product Z is. She stops dead in her tracks as she sees my gun in its holster. She stops talking and fast walks out of the aisle. I just assume she realized I don't work there and left to find someone who does. I go about my business and proceed to the cashier line. As I'm waiting to check out, a swarm of about 8 police officers arrives. They come straight to me with the agitated lady behind shouting, "That's him. That's the guy with the gun." They point their guns at me and order my hands up. I drop what I have and comply. I state that I work for Company Z and that I have a permit for my weapon. They lower and holster their guns after the commotion and apologize for the confusion, but say they got a call about a guy walking around the store waving a gun. I say I'm sorry, but since I have been here, my gun has been holstered. It never left the holster. They turn to the lady and ask if it's true that I never took my gun out of the holster. She yells that I'm lying, and that I can't have a gun in the store anyway. They, of course, go and check the security footage and see that I did nothing wrong. They let me go about my business and apologize again for the misunderstanding. They then turn around and handcuff the lady who called and tell her she is being arrested for misusing the emergency services system and inciting panic. For clarity, I am a white male, but look Hispanic due to the dark skin tone I have year-round. Story 3. This story takes place over 10 years ago. I am from Saskatchewan, Canada, and if you know our winter temperatures, then you will understand why I was excited to go to Texas to visit my dad and stepmother over the holidays. However, let me just say that their winter weather is like my spring weather. So I was in shorts and tank tops basically the entire time. Now that I have given a little bit of information, let me introduce you to the players of this story. You have me, a 16-year-old female who is the stereotype Canadian polite until you push me too far. You have entitled mom who is truly the definition of a Karen. You have an entitled dad who believes women need to do what he says and serve him. And you have their son, who looked to be about 6. Let me set the stage. Target, week after Christmas, and me in a pair of shorts that were not that short and were bought for me by my mom, who is a traditional teacher and who made sure I was always appropriately dressed, and a tank top that showed a little skin. Again, my mom had bought it for me. I was out shopping with my stepmother and was looking at clothes as she needed to get some groceries. As I was looking around, I was listening to my music, both headphones in, when all of a sudden my headphones were ripped out of my ears, and this lady started yelling at me. This is the conversation, most of which I remember as it was just that crazy. Entitled Mom, where are your parents? Me, I'm sorry. What? Is something wrong? Entitled Mom, I said, where are your parents? Or are you too stupid? Me, listen, lady, I don't know what your issue is, but please leave me alone. Entitled Mom, no, where are your parents? Me, why are you wanting to know? Entitled Mom, because you are too young to be by yourself and are dressed like that. I will call the police. Me, what? Listen, lady, I'm old enough to be looking at clothes by myself. And also I'm not dressed badly. Entitled Mom, yes, you are. Only bad girls dress like you in this kind of weather. Or did your parents never teach you to respect your body? Me, okay, lady, listen, I'm not from here. I'm only visiting during the holidays. Entitled Mom, no, you're not. I know you're from here, you just like dressing inappropriately. You need to learn to dress appropriately for the weather. At this point, I see a large man over 6 feet tall walk over. He was dragging his son. I should mention at the time my height was about 4'7", very short for my age. However, anyone looking at me could clearly see that I was not a child, that I was at least a teen. Entitled Dad, what's going on here? Entitled Mom, I was just telling this little girl that she needs to put on some proper clothes. Me, and I was just telling you that I'm not from here. I live in Saskatchewan. Entitled Dad, that place doesn't exist. Stop lying. My wife is right. It's people who dress like you that make us homeschool our child. We don't want them to be corrupted. Me, actually, it does exist. It's in Canada. Entitled Mom, be quiet, you troublemaker. No one asked you. Me, asterisk, looking at the dad, asterisk. So you say that people like me is why you homeschool your son. Maybe if you did send your kid to school, he would learn where Canada is. Entitled Mom, asterisk, starts screaming louder, asterisk, you are from here and like dressing like that. She then started saying cheap stuff about me and even about my mom, so now I was mad. My mom was a single parent as my dad was never really in my life. Say what you want about me, but my mom? I will defend her fiercely. I walk towards the front where I know employees will be. Entitled Mom and Entitled Dad followed while still dragging their son. Me, okay, now listen to my voice very clearly. I am not from Texas. I am from Saskatchewan, Canada. I don't have your southern accent. I am not a child, and I am not dressed inappropriately. Entitled Dad starts getting in my face, screaming that he will have me arrested for dressing like that. He's so close that I can feel the spit hitting my face. He then grabs me and tells me I will be the prison troublemaker from now on. This is where I act. I knee him hard, and as he falls, I kick him straight in the face. He is now on the ground. I got a good shot in and was very proud. By this time, security and the police were called. As a police officer is talking to me, I ask if there is any way to call my stepmother up to the front, so she's not looking for me. They do, and as I'm waiting for her to come up, I start explaining what happened. I show the officer my ID, which clearly not only says that I am in fact from Saskatchewan, but that I was only 16, which makes me a minor. Oh boy, is entitled dad in even more trouble now. My stepmother comes to the front, and I explain what happened. She is fuming. The officer asks me if I want to press charges, and I ask how that will work as a minor who lives in Canada. He explains, and I agree. But I do also tell the officer of my concerns for the kid, because if the parents react like that to someone in public, how do they treat him in private? He agrees to file the concerns as he agrees it is worrying. Emergency medical services are called for entitled dad, as I may or may not have broken his nose, and for me as they don't want to take any chances and could already see bruises forming quickly. I was given the all clear. Grandma was called to pick up the boy. She seemed really nice and was very apologetic for her son and daughter-in-law, and as I was leaving with my stepmother, I saw entitled dad and entitled mom sitting in the back of 2 police cars. Aftermath: I don't have the full details, but for my case, entitled mom was found guilty of harassment, and entitled dad was found guilty of harassment and assault on a minor. I don't know what happened to the kid, but I hope he got to live with someone awesome who didn't act the way his parents did. Edit. Okay, so let me make a couple of things clear. I have received a few messages about how a girl your size could have taken down a man who was much bigger than me. It's called self-defense, which I had been taking for multiple years at that point, due to other situations which I won't put here but might share later on. Finally, for the people saying that I'm contradicting myself in my post about visiting my father, but my mom raised me as a single parent. No, I'm not. My mom did raise both myself and my brother on her own. I was trying to reconnect with my dad. He split when I was a baby, once in a while reappearing. My mom wanted us to have a relationship with him as he is our dad. Brother worked retail so could not come that time due to store policy and Boxing Day. He still had rights to his kids as he got visitation. My mom was not going to fight with him on seeing us as she would not have been able to afford a lawyer, but my dad could have. My dad is a jerk for other things he did, but was never physically abusive. You don't know the dynamics of my family or history. All you really should know is that mom is the best, and I am protective of her for everything she went through. Dad is a jerk, but unfortunately still my dad. I was 16, so did not have much choice in the matter as, again, I did not want to cause more issues for my mom. Story 4. I live in one of those middle-of-nowhere desert towns where almost everyone knows almost everyone, and it's so hot here, but dirt cheap to buy a home or land in. It's not uncommon for old cars to last out here as they almost never rust and people keep fixing them. After high school, I worked hard at a local job to get my own place. I ended up buying a small plot of land with a trailer on it off of a local guy that decided he was going to move to Texas. The guy also sold me his old Ford Escort prior to that. It was an okay first car. Got me around well enough. Still have it too. 10 years have gone by since then. For a while, I spent a lot of my time tinkering with an old 1987 Monte Carlo that I bought super cheap as it was without an engine or transmission. I loved that car as an older cousin of mine had one when I was a kid, and I always wanted one of my own. I spent 2 years fixing up the one I got with help from some friends and finished it in 2019. Since the engine was missing, I dropped in a junkyard Chevrolet 305 V8 that was connected to a rebuilt 4-speed automatic transmission with low miles from a totaled car. Then I painted it myself inside a friend's garage with a Harbor Freight sprayer and some General Motors black single-stage gloss paint and buffed it to a shine. I finished it up with some gold Monte Carlo decals and some classic moon rims I bought from the local junkyard and polished up. I also partially redid the interior by replacing the seats and put in a custom steering wheel. I'm not really a mechanic, but my friends all helped me. Online how-to videos on my smartphone really helped as well. The car was fun to drive and looked good, and I kept it in good order. That is until this mess went down. Now, I didn't really trust some of the local law enforcement out here before, and this gave me even more reason not to. A lot of the cops around here are barely qualified for the job. They are practically hired with a handshake and just told to play video games for training. Granted though, many of them are really nice. The sheriff is even kind of a friend of mine, but he's really one of the only competent ones there. Most of the rest really don't do their jobs very well, especially whenever a new one gets hired on, like a guy that went out of his way to move to my town just to get to be a cop. In this case, he was the nephew of the sheriff. He even brought his own Crown Victoria with a loudspeaker to drive around town in. Let's refer to this guy as the nephew cop since he was the sheriff's nephew. The nephew cop and I didn't know each other personally yet, but I was aware of him. He was not very bright and high on his own ego. He was like Barney Fife and John Cena had an illegitimate son together because he was a tall, strong-looking man that was always giving people creepy looks and patrolled on foot up and down Main Street with a clipboard in hand and a big grin on his face. He also liked to publicly flex his muscles in front of people. One Saturday morning, I took my Monte Carlo out to meet a friend, but they ended up bailing because of a last-minute issue with their girlfriend. I thought, meh, no problem. I'll just get some fast food and go home. I went to the local burger place and got a meal to go, and as I was walking out, there was a lady outside looking over my car. People would stop here and there to ask me about my car and where I got it. I usually don't mind talking so long as they are polite, though this woman ended up anything but. She seemed in early to mid-30s or so, not really sure. I asked her if she liked my car. She stood up, took one look at me and snickered. I asked her what was so funny. To get an idea of what I looked like at the time, I was a skinny guy with a scraggly beard and was wearing a faded AC t-shirt with the sleeves ripped off, along with worn-out cut-off denim shorts and flip-flops. I guess she figured I was poor or something. So she was probably judging my appearance. She looked me up and down in a very obvious way, and then said, "There's no way this is your car. You couldn't possibly afford something this nice." Now I have a tendency to get sarcastic or snide when people make assumptions about me. So I said back, "Oh really, lady? The title is in my name. And these keys right here in my hand say I'm the owner too." Karen just glared at me as I put the keys in the lock and began to open the door. I looked behind her and noticed a beige 1990s Volvo with a missing headlight and had out-of-state plates on it parked not far from me. I put two and two together and laughed. "Let me guess, lady? That's your car over there?" She started to turn beet red. I laughed and said, "Oh, don't be ashamed. Those things aren't lookers, but they'll run forever." I figured this was over, but as I was opening my car door, I suddenly felt her nails digging into my shoulder. She was screeching so loud my ears were hurting, and before I could turn around, she kicked me between my legs from behind with a high-heeled shoe so hard I collapsed in agony. And true to my luck, the nephew cop drove right up because he'd heard her screeching from down the street during his noon patrol. As soon as he was out of his car, Karen ran to him crying and saying that I was a carjacker that was attempting to take her new car. I wasn't looking at either of them as I was on the ground wincing in a fetal position from the pain. The next thing I heard was the nephew cop yelling, "Put your hands behind your back." And then I was pinned down by his knee on my spine and forcibly cuffed. I tried telling him that I knew his uncle and could prove I am the real owner of the car, but he called me a rude name and told me to shut up. Then he picked my keys up off the ground and actually handed them to Karen. Then he seemed to do a hero pose while she gave me a big grin. No matter what I said, he wasn't listening to me because he fully believed her. And then I had to see Karen start up my car and drive off with it. My heart sank as I watched it sail down the road with her laughing at me. Then the nephew cop dragged me back to the sheriff's office. I'd hoped his uncle was in, but just my bad luck, he was out to lunch, So the nephew cop put me in the cell and told me to keep quiet. I was angry, but I knew I wasn't going to make my situation any better, so I just waited. And during that time, the nephew cop kept giving me looks of contempt. At one time, he walked across the cell with a nightstick, grazing it against each bar like he was trying to intimidate me. At least an hour went by, and the sheriff finally came in through the door, nursing a big gulp, but froze the second he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I was about to speak when his nephew jumped in and said, "I caught this lowlife creep trying to steal a lady's car, so I hauled him in." That's when I finally got my chance to speak and said, "Yeah, only it was my car. The one I spent so long fixing up." The nephew cop just rolled his eyes and said not to listen to me. But the sheriff silenced him and asked for my full story. As I tried to tell it, his nephew was making dismissive looks and kept repeatedly interrupting until the sheriff told him to sit down and be quiet. Then when I was finally able to say everything that happened, he was furious. The sheriff laid into his nephew, who was cowering in a chair like a little boy, and saying that it indeed was my car, and he stupidly gave my keys to a thief that had assaulted me. The nephew cop started frantically apologizing and trying to say he was just trying to help. But the sheriff called him a fool that just wanted to play hero by saving a damsel in distress. And now the whole department would be in hot water for his unlawful arrest and physical assault against me. Then he finally let me out of the cell. I got some ice to put where she hit me and got taken home. The sheriff and his nephew went back to the burger restaurant, but Karen's car was no longer there. They got the closed-circuit television footage from the camera the restaurant had looking outside. It caught everything minus the audio. Karen came back riding piggyback with a guy on a motorcycle over a half hour from the time she left with my car. She blew him a kiss and then drove off in her Volvo. The sheriff scrambled everyone, even the nephew, to try and chase her down, but they couldn't find her as she'd already driven out of the county lines. Some phone calls were made to other departments to look for her, and I had to sit at home with an ice pack all evening waiting for news on what happened. A couple of days later, my car was found just a few miles out of town. Karen had broken all of the windows with what I'm assuming was the tire iron, and then put the car in neutral and let it coast down a deep rocky hill, which rolled it into the bottom ditch, which smashed the front end and warped the frame. It was completely totaled. I wanted to cry from the sound of metal grinding on rock as the tow truck pulled it back up. The nephew cop was there too, and he couldn't even look at me the entire time. My insurance also didn't want to cover the car, so the sheriff's office was made to pay me the value of my Monte Carlo instead, since the nephew cop let it happen, which was only about $5,000, though that was honestly close to what I had into it since I did almost all the work by hand with the help of friends. The nephew cop also paid me another $2,000 for my trouble and said it was most of his savings. Karen was caught at a motel estate over some time later and arrested for possession of illegal substances. Grand theft auto was just one of many things she was charged with. I got on a video call just to see her in court and testify. She looked like a wreck the whole time because she knew she was in trouble. And it wasn't long before she was pronounced guilty. She got 10 years behind bars with no possibility of parole. As for the nephew cop, the sheriff all but begged me not to sue him because he was his nephew, and he promised his sister he'd look out for the guy. I'm not a person who goes around suing people and being happy about it. So I let it go, and the nephew cop actually started taking some sort of course on how to properly do his job. And so the incident was more or less swept under the rug, and the nephew cop was demoted to sitting at a desk all day answering phones. And they would be docking part of his pay until every penny was paid back. He's still regulated to desk duty half of the time these days, and he still avoids me any time I'm near him. Arguably, he's a better cop now though because he mellowed out. As for me, it took some time, but with help, I finally located a replacement Monte Carlo project car with a clean title, and it was the same year too. I salvaged as many parts as I could from my old one and used it all in the build. The engine and transmission were still good, and somehow so were most of the base parts, and the sheriff personally came by to help my friends, and I built the new car in his downtime. It took a year, but now I've got a fresh-looking Monte Carlo that looks just like my old one. You'd never know they weren't the same car. I've made sure to have better insurance this time around, and I'm never letting a Karen near my car again. Story 5. 1 year ago, I was renting a house next to the most unpleasant neighbor I hope to ever experience. The only thing I liked about her was her cat. This freakishly adorable tabby who could grab even the most hardened criminal's heart with its charm. Every time I came home from work, he would sidle up next to me for some tender loving care, which he never got from my neighbor. As far as I could tell, she just used the poor thing to keep away mice and play, that is, be terrorized by her toddler grandkids on the weekends. The poor feline looked severely underfed and always appreciated the meals I'd leave out for him on our back porch. I have an indoor feline of my own, a tail-less ball of energy, aptly named Goblin, and one day he managed to escape outside. Luckily, I found him within a few hours, but by the next morning, what jumped on my lap? Not Goblin, alas, but a flea. And if my social butterfly cat had fleas, I was positive the next-door feline had fleas too. Now, I already had a bitter history with this neighbor. In addition to being terribly unkind to her cat, she'd harassed my older parents when they were helping me move in. Why? Because our moving truck rental was blocking a dead-end sidewalk in front of my house. My parents are very kind people. My mom has literally been thanked on customer service hotlines for being so sweet. And this lady was berating them needlessly for ruining the community, ranting even longer than they'd been parked, until they eventually moved to an inconvenient and wholly unnecessary distance. Regardless of her unpleasant personality, I figured I'd warn her anyway in the best interest of her feline. When I knew she was at home the next day, I knocked on her front door. When she answered no hello, just a scowl, I started to explain that my escaped indoor cat had fleas, and so there was a good possibility that her outdoor cat also had fleas. Immediately she berates me for letting my cat get fleas and snaps that she keeps her house very clean, unlike me, so there is no way her cat has fleas. I just loudly sighed at her and went back home as she continued to yell. "You've never even been in my house, lady? And that's not how fleas work." All week I noticed her cat scratching himself raw and felt so bad for the little guy. I wanted to give him flea medication and a flea bath, but with my neighbor now watching me like a hawk and screeching like a banshee, if I even pet him anymore, I had to leave him alone. But I realized there was something I could do. You see, we shared the same landlord, who was very concerned about household pests and instructed us to call him at the first sight of a bed bug, tick, etc. I also knew that my neighbor was keeping her cat a secret from the landlord to avoid paying the pet rent, as I'd overheard her bragging about this to a friend outside one day. So what do? I called up the landlord to explain the flea situation, and I made sure to add that my neighbor's cat has also been scratching like crazy. There's a pause. "Did you say she has a cat?" "Yes," I assure him. "She definitely has an indoor-outdoor cat." Turns out that my neighbor had harassed our landlord into replacing most of her carpet due to her alleged cat allergy. I don't know why the landlord caved into this, but it wasn't cheap. And now our landlord learned that not only had the difficult woman lied about an allergy to score a free renovation, but she hadn't paid pet rent in more than a year. Well, an exterminator gets called, and our landlord himself shows up to oversee the whole thing. We had both received a flyer taped to our front doors, giving notice that he would be coming to our houses on that date. But I may or may not have removed my neighbors, so she wouldn't be able to just hide evidence of her cat for a few hours. So our landlord arrives, and I listen gleefully with my window open as my neighbor tries to prevent him and the exterminator from entering. Eventually, she allows them to come inside, where there is obvious evidence of a pet living there. I don't know exactly what transpired between her and the landlord. There must be other issues on her record, being such a difficult person. But a few months later, I had a new next-door neighbor. And guess who the difficult woman purposely abandoned during the move? Her poor feline, who became a much-loved and flea-free member of our house.